was an island in the Cold War. Its western side was completely surrounded by the enemy, while its eastern side fought to keep its own people from crossing over. If you could make it to the west, freedom was yours. Many tried, and many died. The wall separated families and friends. It broke the heart of a great city in two. It was dotted with forbidden crossings like Checkpoint Charlie and the Brandenburg Gate. And then, on the night of November 9th, 1989, because of a simple mistake, they burst open in a joyous rampage. While celebrations exploded on both sides of the wall, the awesome might of the East German army and their state security apparatus, the Stasi, scrambled to take up positions and countermand the chaos.
Who knew? Chancellor Kohl didn't know. I didn't know. I'm not sure Gorbachev knew.
As Germans, east and west, rushed to embrace each other for the first time since the wall had gone up, guns were brought to bear. When the wall fell, we all knew the Cold War was over. Now, years later, this is the declassified story of why it fell.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
I take pride in the word, Ich bin ein Berliner.
When World War II ends in 1945, there's a pact between the Soviets, the English, the French, and the Americans. The city of Berlin is divided up between them, and Germany is divided into two countries so it cannot make war again. Rare color footage recently released from East German archives reveals Berlin's devastation. The four powers must devise a way to revive this city that was once one of Europe's most beautiful. They can't agree on how to pick up the pieces. Soon, the French, British, and American sectors are collapsed into West Berlin, a half-city that will become a glittering oasis of capitalism in the midst of the dreary East German state.
I think the Soviets were a lot tougher on the East Germans than we were on the West Germans. I think they went much further with denazification and other kinds of, returning Germany to an almost a pastoral kind of situation. Whereas we realized that the American taxpayer was going to have to pay for West Germany if we didn't allow it to revive.
Capitalist or communist, whoever can bring the city out of the ashes and make it theirs will have proved the power of their ideas. This dusty battleground will be the ultimate prize and the ultimate proof of the victor of the Cold War. The strategies of the two sides are at odds. The Soviets want war reparations. The three Western allies do not. The Soviets covertly strip East Germany of tools and machinery. The United States includes West Germany in the Marshall Plan, which provides funding for rebuilding the shattered German state. The Soviets try to turn East Germany into a showplace for their ideas about a planned, centralized economy. The United States encourages capitalism and the free market. Pressure on the Soviets increases when the United States promotes the Truman Doctrine, declaring that Americans will give aid and support to free peoples being pressured or dominated by armed minorities or outside pressures. Stalin begins to squeeze. He encircles West Berlin with troops, shuts off all access by land and water, and demands that the other powers withdraw their troops. Nothing goes in or out of West Berlin. The Soviets are determined to starve out the West by blockading the city. The Allies respond with one of the greatest humanitarian efforts known to man, the Berlin Airlift.
When the Soviets blocked the accommodation ways to Berlin so that no food could reach the population, the Allies put up an airlift. A plane landed every third minute and brought food to the city.
Over 275,000 Allied flights cut a path to Berlin, running supplies 24 hours a day. Life in West Berlin is still tough, but it is now possible to survive. The blockade of Berlin becomes a public relations disaster for the Soviets, and they are forced to abandon it in 1949. The Soviets and the East Germans allow regular transit of goods to West Berlin to resume. The borders between the Soviet and free sectors are mere checkpoints. In many places, they are just white lines painted in the street. In fact, a number of East Germans work in the West since the jobs and the currency are much better. Stalin seems to be slipping. This bold play for Berlin inspires the formation of NATO, an alliance of North Atlantic nations formed to counter Soviet threats like the blockade of Berlin. The Soviets and the Americans stand toe-to-toe. After Stalin dies in March of 1953, Soviet boss Nikita Khrushchev again issues ultimatums and demands for withdrawal. But the Allies stand their ground. June 1953. Previously secret communist footage shows residents of East Berlin rioting against the tough East German government that controls every aspect of their lives.
There were the East Berlin revolts of 1953, in which people got out and tried to smash Soviet tanks, not very effectively, but they did demonstrate their unhappiness with the way the system was working out in East Germany, because there was some economic growth, but there was no initiative. No people could really take their independent economic initiative. They had merely to respond to the state.
Tens of thousands of East Germans riot, first in Berlin and then in the countryside. They release political prisoners and overrun the East German government, but the true power behind Ulbricht and the GDR soon appears. The Soviets whisk their puppet leader away in a tank and battle protesters in the streets. Over 1,000 East Germans die that month in 1953.
East Germans were leaving in enormous numbers, coming into West Germany, which kind of threatened the stability of the East German communist state, so that we were getting reports about what President Kennedy planned to do, what Chancellor Adenauer was saying about it, what Willy Brandt, the mayor of West Berlin, was going to do about it. There was a sense of something imminent, something very drastic about to happen, but we didn't know what.
West Berlin is a festering sore to the Soviets, but Communist Party boss Walter Ulbricht has a plan to deal with it. In August of 1961, the secret construction plans are approved by Khrushchev. Miles of barbed wire are cached in and around East Berlin, and tens of thousands of new border guards are pressed into service. The Soviets contribute tough and disciplined soldiers to make sure the surprise will go as planned. The wall is about to be born. Summer 1961. East Germany, and through it the whole Eastern Bloc, is losing citizens night and day. East German leaders like party chair Walter Ulbricht beg the Kremlin to let them shut down the border completely.
There are people in West Germany that wish for us to mobilize the construction workers of the capital of the GDR to erect a wall.
In August of 1961, In a move that accelerates the Cold War beyond anything the world has yet seen, the Russians secretly give their approval and send in troops to back that closure.
There was an evident sense of tension in Berlin. Now, my bureau was in Bonn, but when necessary, I'd go to Berlin, and every day you'd find thousands of people coming in from East Germany and ending up there in the Marienfelde refugee camp, where they were taken care of, eventually flown to West Germany.
On August 12th, over 4,000 people fled the GDR for West Berlin. Like storm birds before the whirlwind, people got out any way they could. And then the trap was sprung.
At about 4 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang, and it was our Berlin cameraman saying to me, "Dan, you better come down here to the sector border and see what's happening." I said, "Oh, all right, it better be good." So I called the front desk and said, where's room service? I need to go out and work, and I need to have some coffee right away. He said, "Room service is not working because our employees did not come in from East Berlin tonight."
Am 12. August ist die Grenze nur ein weißer Strich.
On August 12th, the border was just a white line painted across the pavement. On August 13th, a wall appeared, a wall of men. Standing 6 feet apart, these East German soldiers formed the beginning of one of mankind's most terrifying structures.
What we saw was they were rolling out from trucks big bales of barbed wire and stringing the barbed wire along under guard of police and closing off the exits and the passageways between East and West Berlin.
The bulkheads are sealed, and you're either on the right side of them or you aren't. Trains and subways stop. Telephone lines are cut. Streets and buildings are cut in half by the cordon of troops.
The West Berliners went into the East sector, East Berliners came into the western part to work. That was all possible until 1961, until the wall was built and everything changed totally. After that, we were really living on an island.
For insurance, the city is ringed with Soviet troops, backed up by 10,000 East German soldiers. First, the troops begin to give way to 25 miles of barbed wire and concrete posts. The conscripted Vopos, low-level East German troops pressed into service as a human wall, guard workmen jackhammering pavement and planting posts. Concertina wire begins to wrap around the city in a barrier that will soon be over 100 miles in circumference. The wall resembles a hastily fabricated prison camp, except that the prisoners are on the outside looking in at prosperous and wealthy West Berlin.
Geschockt und wütend begannen die Westberliner die Reaktion der Kommunisten.
Shocked and outraged, West Germans began to test the resolve of the communists. As main roads like Potsdamer Platz were wrecked, angry West Berliners confronted Vopos armed with fixed bayonets. The GDR and the Soviets responded with water cannons and established machine gun emplacements and anti-tank barricades.
Even the Brandenburg Gate, an emblematic symbol in the center of it all, plays host to a machine gun nest and a clandestine observation post. By the end of August 13th, 1961, which comes to be known as Barbed Wire Sunday, the razor-sharp outline of the wall is in place, and the East Germans announce that the border is secured. Ulbricht declares that a great blow has been struck against the capitalists with this anti-fascist wall of protection. But now, the hardships that plagued West Berlin during the blockade and airlift are visited on East Berlin and East Germany. The West prospers, and the East begins to strangle.
What Churchill said about the Iron Curtain was not completely true when he said it in 1946. But by 1961, with the building of this wall, it was not just an iron curtain, it was a cement curtain that really divided East and West.
In the immediate aftermath of Barbed Wire Sunday, the escapes occur at a furious pace. The wall is heavily guarded by Vopos, but even they are not immune to the escape fever that sweeps the East. A cameraman gets an amazing shot of a young GDR soldier vaulting over the barbed wire. In the early days of the wall, there are plenty of holes to escape through. There are gaps in the wire and in the patrols that allow people to dash for freedom. One of the most popular and most frightening methods of escape was to simply jump from a building. The wall quite literally shatters many neighborhoods, cutting through squares and buildings. The GDR solves this problem by relocating hundreds of people from buildings on the border, which leaves the buildings open to escapees who would sneak in and then out of the western-facing side of the building.
If people were escaping through the west side of a building, the GDR boarded up the ground floor. Soon, people began to jump from the second floor, and when those windows were boarded up, from the third and fourth. People threw mattresses out of the windows to land on. They climbed down ropes and bed sheets.
In the French sector, the wall actually became a wall of a house there, and I happened to be nearby when a kid managed to get into a room in the house and jump and got killed. Jumped 3 floors, got killed.
Often, West German onlookers helped the escapees. Firemen produced rescue nets and saved the fleeing Easterners from injury or death on the cobblestones below. Before the wall went up, about 160 people were killed trying to escape to the west. After the wall, that number skyrockets. The first death at the wall is that of Rudolf Urban, who tries to lower himself to the ground through one of these border buildings. Urban falls and dies in Bernauerstrasse.
There were cases where we heard firing at night, and you went there, and then you could sometimes see what had happened, that somebody had tried to escape and had been shot as they tried to escape. It really got to be quite tragic.
By now, the first concrete slabs of the wall have fallen into place, and the buildings the jumpers used are completely sealed. Using routes only recently revealed, those seeking to escape will have to be much more clever or much more courageous. They will seek out the secret ways to the west, or they will boldly confront the wall itself. After the 1953 riots in East Germany, the communists worked hard at building the perfect police state. And then, in August of 1961, they put a wall around it. At first, it is only barbed wire and guards, but soon it seems as if the wall will stand forever.
I think the reality took a while to sink in. You know, I mean, people didn't realize it was going to be 12 feet, 2 feet thick. You know, you wouldn't be able to get out. I mean, it was absolutely permanent. I think the feeling of a permanent barrier was not quite there, you know, in mid-August. But by September, you know, of course, it was something that was setting in a major fashion. There was a period in October when it was our tanks protecting our officials who were going in, and their tanks protecting their officials.
It is October 1961. The issue that nearly starts World War III is the free transit to the east of American officials. The East German border guards insist on examining American passports, and the Americans insist that they travel unmolested. The American military backs them up with jeeps and tanks. And soon, the Soviets bring 10 of their tanks into the city to face off against the 10 American Patton tanks at Checkpoint Charlie.
Die Konfrontation am Checkpoint Charlie.
The confrontation at Checkpoint Charlie is really one of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War. The world risks nuclear war with that confrontation. Never before have the two superpowers faced off against each other directly. Never before have Soviet and US troops leveled guns at each other. The tension is almost unbearable.
I stood there on that point at Checkpoint Charlie and looked at Soviet and American tanks 100 yards from each other, muzzle to muzzle. But I looked at that and I said, this is a picture of how World War III will start.
When it comes right down to it, neither side is willing to push the conflict. In secret negotiations, diplomats arrange an exit for both sides. The standoff ends when the Americans agree not to travel east, and the Soviets agree to pull their tanks out of the city. August 17, 1962. Following a friend in a sprint across a blind spot in the defenses, young East German construction worker Peter Fechter is spotted at the base of the wall. He begins to scale it, and the guards open fire.
Why would people run across to try to be free, knowing that they would be gunned down by the East German police in that no man's land?
Hundreds of spectators on both sides of the wall are watching the drama as the young man lay dying. West Berliners can't reach him. The Vopos on the eastern side are terrified that they will be shot by the Americans.
One of them shot and left to bleed to death, and then pulled back, a symbol to others seeking freedom.
And so, Peter Fechter dies at the foot of the Berlin Wall. West Berliners are angered by American inaction, and as a result, President John F. Kennedy works hard to support and inspire them.
There are many people in the world who really don't understand, or say they don't, what is the great issue between the free world and the communist world. Let them come to Berlin.
On the way up the stairs to get out on the balcony, he had asked his English-German interpreter, I'm not very good at languages, but what can I say in a few German words that they might like to hear?
All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the word, Ich bin ein Berliner.
Ich bin ein Berliner. I am a Berliner. And then they really went wild.
I think Kennedy, aside from the Cuban crisis, would probably regard that as one of the most tense periods during his administration.
People try to get out any way they can. East Germans run through checkpoints at high speed. In some cases, they steal buses or taxis. Sometimes they make it, and sometimes they die, hung up on barriers and shot by machine gun-toting Vopos. Secret East German plans reveal that barriers are staggered to keep people from driving straight through, and vertical bars are added to keep people from slipping under them. For a while, the network of sewers underneath Berlin serve as an escape route. The choked network of pipes offers an escape route for those who can stand the smell and the suffocating closeness of the ancient plumbing. It is a dangerous route, and it soon becomes an impossible one. The East Germans methodically cut off all access points to the underground passages. Water is also an escape route, but a difficult one. Patrol boats run along the River Spree. At the age of 18, East German citizen Brigitte Temple escapes by water.
It brings you up. The water brings you up, so I had to know how to keep myself down. And all of a sudden, I felt things flying around me, so they detected me in the water, and I didn't realize I was getting shot. They did not shoot my spine, but they shot my legs 3 times.
Brigitte was one of the lucky ones.
The British police, the MPs, were on the other side. When I'm coming out there in my underpanties and a bra, and a blouse, one said, "What kind of mermaid do they have here?" And I just collapsed.
Every time a new escape route is found, the East develops a countermeasure. In all, the wall is completely overhauled and rebuilt 4 times during the Cold War.
Most people think that the Berlin Wall was just a concrete wall. In fact, in some places, it was a 200-yard wide, perfect killing machine. In 1961, it was mostly barbed wire and cinder blocks. Later on, the wall consisted of other barriers, such as steel stakes, known as Stalin's grass, to catch and impale running escapees. By the 70s, bunkers appeared, manned by guards, with direct orders to kill escapees. Next came a rail to which are attached hundreds of attack dogs, and then a heavily mined strip of white sand to show the tracks of escapees. Extremely bright lights illuminated vehicle traps and anti-tank ditches day and night.
Just beyond the lights is a special roadway constructed to carry ultra-quiet military cars that have been outfitted to run as silently as possible. And then an alarmed, electrified fence. Assuming he makes it that far, the fugitive faces a final concrete wall on the western side that stands between 11 and 14 feet tall. At the top of that wall is a specially constructed asbestos tube, too slippery to grasp either with hands or a grapple hook.
The wall was painted bright white, and thereby providing the best possible target for the snipers and the guards on the eastern side.
In the spring of 1989, after almost 30 years of killing fugitives, the East German government orders guards to stop shooting at escapees. Recently revealed Stasi documents show the automatic guns on tripwires are quietly disassembled. The terror of the killing zone begins to fade. The wall still stands, but it trembles before the winds of change. Decades of construction and diabolical design will be undone by one man's colossal and shocking blunder. It is 1989, and the East German border has claimed almost 1,000 lives. No one knows how many people have been caught, imprisoned, and executed for trying to escape the communist workers' paradise of the German Democratic Republic. By far, the deadliest stretch of the GDR border is the Berlin Wall. But in 1989, there are signs that the end is near for the Iron Curtain.
When you think back, it should have been, I suppose, understandable when you give consideration to Gorbachev's visit to East Berlin, where he said the policy for the GDR will be made not in Moscow but in Berlin. That was a clear renunciation of the use of force to keep the Soviet Empire together.
Still, the fearsome Berlin Wall stands. The Soviets, under President Mikhail Gorbachev, are backing away ever so slowly, and a power vacuum is created. The East German government is headed by Egon Krenz, and until now, nobody in the West West has understood how and why this government doomed the wall to collapse.
It was just a time that everybody knew was a time of great change in Eastern Europe, but nobody knew just when and how things would evolve in East Germany, which was the key.
November 9th, 1989. A momentous meeting is taking place. The Communist Central Committee is trying to find a way to stop people from fleeing west. Lift travel restrictions, but only so much. That is the answer. Citizens of East Germany will be allowed to permanently emigrate without stating a reason, but they will need to obtain a passport and then a visa. The policy is to go into effect immediately. Overnight, border personnel will be briefed on the change. Communist Party leader Günter Schabowski holds a press conference that evening.
Günter Schabowski comes. He was, as I remember, the party boss of East Berlin. And he droned on and on and on and on, talking for almost an hour, and then finally somebody asked a question that was on everybody's mind. Well, what about the wall?
Although nobody in the room knows it, not even Schabowski himself, the Cold War is about to end. The biggest secret of all is that the wall will fall because of a mistake. One slip of the tongue and the deadly symbol of the longest war of the 20th century will topple. Reading from hastily scribbled notes, Schabowski casually mentions that travel restrictions have been lifted. He seems unaware that he is not supposed to announce the policy until after border personnel have a chance to figure out how to make it work. Schabowski gets the announcement wrong, disastrously wrong.
As I was writing this down, the hairs stood up on the back of my neck. And I realized that I was in the middle of the biggest story of my lifetime.
Today, as far as I know, a decision has been made. We have decided to adopt a regulation which enables every citizen of the GDR to leave the country by way of the GDR border crossings.
The shock in the room is plain. Schabowski has just knocked a giant hole in the wall. The repercussions will be felt around the world. The Associated Press is the first to hit the wires with the scoop. East Germans, as they hear this on the news, start to clog the checkpoints. The guards and border workers on duty that evening in November are overwhelmed as the crowds gather, but they don't have any idea what to do. Schabowski's timing could not have been worse. In the West, the word spreads quickly.
I did not want to overplay the hand of the United States of America. I did not want at that critical moment for us to gloat, to stick my fingers in Mr. Gorbachev's eyes, which would have been the worst thing you could possibly do.
For the first time on camera, the General Secretary of East Germany, Egon Krenz, speaks about the botched announcement.
I had to decide, should we close the border crossings so tight nobody can cross, which would have meant tanks, or should we let it run its course and open the borders? For that, there was no written order or any preparation or the border patrol, which makes the situation seem chaotic.
The East German army goes on alert and invokes a state of increased combat readiness. It's midnight in Moscow, and no one is heard from the Kremlin. KGB officers in East Berlin seem unable to raise a response from their headquarters. The East German army prepares to take the steps necessary to reverse Schabowski's blunder. But for a crucial period of several hours that night, no one seems to be in charge of the border crossings at the wall.
So the border guards are standing there not knowing what to do, tens, then hundreds, and then thousands of curious and sort of excited and then perhaps increasingly angry East Berliners are coming to the checkpoints. Finally, the border guards just give in and say, okay, go ahead. And the dam is burst.
Letting Easterners go west is one thing. Letting Westerners into the East is another thing entirely. If the GDR can't control its own borders, it is not a sovereign nation anymore. There's no going back now. West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl uses an old German saying to sum up the situation.
The pear is peeled. It's a phrase I use often for my home in the Pfalz. It means it's done.
The wall is falling. How far will the GDR and the Soviets go to battle the tide? What will happen to the East German officials whose mistakes have brought about this crisis?
Tatsache ist, dass durch diese Mitteilung auf der Pressekonferenz am Abend des 9. November.
The fact is, at the press conference of the evening of the 9th, the most dangerous security situation in East Germany ever arose. We were close to a civil war and nobody realized it.
On November 9th, 1989, history has reversed itself at the Berlin Wall. Because of a series of blunders only recently declassified, beginning with the mistaken announcement that travel restrictions were lifted, the border guards are now being challenged. East German Communist Party boss Egon Krenz is only now realizing the peril that he is in. Years later, historians unravel the truth.
This press conference of November 9th, 1989, it was a mistake. It was a mistake. It was a human failing on one of the top East German leaders. It wasn't supposed to happen this way at all.
At 1 a.m., the most severe challenge yet uncoils near the Brandenburg Gate. West Berliners look east and challenge the border. The communists have to act fast. The country is coming apart under their feet. Post-Cold War interviews with communist military officials reveal East German troops are ordered into a state of increased combat readiness in and around Berlin.
I went to the Brandenburg Gate, of course, and there were already the first people standing on the wall. The Vopo tried to drive them away by using the water guns, but they held on. Hundreds of East Berliners came over the border and hundreds of West Berliners were going into the opposite direction. Totally unknown strangers embraced each other and shouted, "Awesome."
Even one death would have been a sign, and I knew that. I had to decide, will there be bloodshed or will it go smoothly?
Desperate to prove that East Germany is still in control, the East German military sends squads of soldiers to contain the chaos at the Brandenburg Gate. 3 a.m. They begin to push back against the crowd. Finally, they clear the square. But by now, it is too late. The wall faces destruction.
I mean, that was one of the first things that happened. People started hammering at the wall immediately, as I remember, the next day, and they were hammering at it from both sides. And it was great because people were breaking through from both sides and finding each other and reaching through. It was amazing to see how people simply descended on the wall from both sides just to get rid of it, just to pull it apart themselves.
No one knows how the East German army and the secret police will respond to this new assault. Behind them stand the KGB and the Soviet army. It is easy to imagine they will respond harshly to provocation.
There was always a puzzle about what Moscow would do, whether Gorbachev would support repression or an opening, whether there were other forces in Moscow, particularly in the military, that might have wanted a crackdown.
Who knew? Who knew? Chancellor Kohl didn't know. I didn't know. I'm not sure Gorbachev knew. And I'm damn sure Mitterrand and Margaret Thatcher didn't know. We didn't know how all this monumental event would affect the pride of the Soviet military, the nationalist feeling that the Soviet Empire had. And here it was crumbling right in front of their eyes. How would they react? Nobody knew for sure.
The GDR Central Command issues a final ruling about the events of that night. As of 8 a.m., the travel rules will be enforced as written. No more free trips to the west and no trips to the east. The East German government is determined not to be rendered completely irrelevant. Meanwhile, reality and communist rhetoric set out in distinctly different directions.
Events moved so swiftly that people essentially took control of this situation and tore down their government.
40,000 tanks were concentrated in the GDR. They were capable of crushing all resistance and triumphing over any opponent.
Mit dem ich mehr als Diplomatie verband.
They get a phone call from the Soviet diplomat, and he said in a very serious tone, Moscow is surprised about how the situation at the Berlin Wall happened last night.
The KGB and Kremlin experts finally catch up with the events of the previous night. They demand that the East Germans bring the situation to heel and offer the GDR anything they need in terms of military support. After all, the forces of the Warsaw Pact are massed around Germany. Recently revealed documents disclose that the East Germans mobilized 2 elite urban combat units in response to increasingly angry Soviet communiques. In the end, it is the man who promoted Glasnost who breaks the impasse.
I found out about the events on November 10th from the ambassador. The ambassador told me about Shabovsky's announcement and that they had opened the borders. I said that their actions were correct. On the TV screens, I could see how people expressed their feelings. This proved that the question of unification of Germany had passed over to the most important level, the level of the people.
The East Germans finally give in and stand down. Like everyone else, the soldiers and border guards catch the scent of freedom and celebration.
Grüßen von Mikhail Sergeyevich.
I talked with Kachanosov. He told me, Comrade Heinz, the Soviet leadership congratulates you on your courageous decision to open up the wall last night.
Communist Party bosses like Egon Krenz miraculously find themselves congratulated by the Soviets. The war was over, the longest war of the 20th century. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Cold War was at an end. Berlin, scarred and wounded by the decades it suffered at the front lines, Berlin became the scene of celebrations.